So, ladies and gentlemen, some have called it a miracle, some have called it inevitable, that Len Brown won the Super City Mayoralty. It was only 3 years ago that Len Brown celebrated with his family and supporters after he had finally assumed the job he always wanted, the Manukau City Mayoralty. But now he's grabbed the biggest job in Auckland politics, and is arguably probably the second most powerful person in New Zealand after the Prime Minister. Len Brown's campaign catch cry was the Mayor for all of Auckland. And this evening, we discuss whether or not that includes Maori and where that fits in with that catch cry. This afternoon's forum is all about our unique voice as Maori and where it fits in. And of course, the aim of this forum is to raise awareness around the new governance structure, so hopefully John will be able to enlighten us, and also inform Maori about what they can do to ensure their concerns and issues are heard. So what better topic to start off with, keeping it current? We're all about news, you see. Why not start with Len Brown? And I put the first question to you, Sandra Lee. Will he be good for Maori?
Well, I think it's fair to say that in terms of the candidates that were on offer, His Worship, our new mayor, will be better than anybody else who was on offer. And in no small part, it's not so much an issue of left or right politics, but rather the fact that he's done his political groundwork in South Auckland, where there is a very diverse population, but a very significant population of Māori right on the cusp of issues tainui, Ngāti Pawa and others. So I think he'll bring a better understanding, say, than contenders who might have come from elsewhere. But having said that, whoever in the so-called super city over time gets to be the leader will critically have to be informed by every iwi and a robust capacity from Māori through their own infrastructure, informing the mayor of the day, whoever she or he may be. I think it's fair to say nonetheless that this time round and first time out, probably Māori were a bit more fortunate than they might have otherwise have been had another candidate got up. And I say that in no small part because, as you've seen, the last week of the election really saw the old race card, economic poverty card coming out to no small extent, being run by my fellow former colleague, John Banks, when he said, do we want to be governed by the South? But there was an underlying nuance in that message that he was sending that I don't think that we'll ever see coming out of a Brown.
Heta Hudson, what do you think? Do you think he'll be good for Māori?
Well, I guess when you look at his campaign, it was all about inclusion. So I think there's some positive signs there that he's interested in at least having an informed discussion with the various sort of representatives that sort of make up the Auckland region. So I see it as a positive. I've been quite impressed, it's very early days to be honest, but quite impressed with his enthusiasm, and he seems to be sort of saying all the right things right now.
Because Sandra said he is probably the best one on the ballot paper.
Yep.
But does that necessarily make him the best for Māori? Because there was a lot of commentary, if you like, beforehand, during the election campaign, that actually none of the candidates were suitable for this position, for the mayoralty of Auckland. Did you feel anything towards those comments?
Well, I tend to sort of agree with Sandra in terms of when you look at the various candidates, I think Len probably sort of shone out a little bit more than his other sort of counterparts. And I think it was purely because he had a more inclusive view of how Auckland should be governed. So in my opinion, I'm just hoping that that continues and actually trickles down to the various sort of levels in terms of how things are delivered on the ground, and whether that's actually going to translate into real benefits for Māori when we wait to see.
Matiria, what got him through, do you think? We've spoken about the politics of inclusion, if you like. Was that the main reason, do you think, that Len Brown got through?
It's a bit difficult to tell. I live in Dunedin, sort of quite far from the centre of where it's all going on, just about as far as you can get, really. So it was. I had to watch it from afar. It was obvious there were only two candidates. It was either John Banks or Len Brown from the start. Len started his campaign very well and very early, with a clear focus on his roots, and so a lot of his language and his rhetoric was that kind of whānau focused kind of rhetoric, if you like, that I think has resonance across a kind of range of communities, and I think that really helped. And he was the underdog from the beginning as well, which always helps, because there's certain New Zealanders have got this thing about supporting the underdog. But I don't know, Sandra, because you had this interesting analysis from previous elections that I thought might be quite, it's kind of the answer, partly the answer to the question. I do think that the prospect of Len Brown is not as terrifying, given this idea that it's the second most powerful position in the country. It's not as terrifying as some other candidates might have been. But it's always going to be the proof in the pudding, and whether he can deliver on not just his promises for infrastructure, which is really interesting, but actually whether we will see a genuine response to the Māori cause for representation on the council, and how he's going to manage that process.
What I'm hearing, though, is there's no real solid tick of approval, if you like. It's like, well, he was the best out of the bunch.
Well,
can we go further than that?
That's the way it is with every election. You know, let's be honest. If you look at key and golf, you know, what's the difference? Toss a coin, you know, any, many. But so, you know, I don't think that's so unusual. You know, if we got to pick who would be perfect, you'd have to get a gun against your head to make them stand, because they're usually thoroughly decent people
but
who are way too smart to do the job.
You know what I mean, though, because there was a lot of commentary, a lot of analysis earlier on in the campaign saying, well, actually, we're not happy with either of these two. Where is a stronger candidate to actually stand for this position?
It's a question of what they're really looking for. Are they looking for someone who's going to, what does that person look like? Does that person even exist? And the chances are it doesn't. You're always going to be looking at someone who can do the job, who's got a record of being able to do a job similar, if not the same, which is both those mayors did. As did other mayors, well, you know, more than some of the other mayors in this region, I have to say. And so, you know, the desire for like the perfect person was always going to be a problem. For Māori, though, the issue has always been, right from the start, this super city structure was set up, it is structurally racist. We want to have it changed. And so who is the best to deliver that change? And it was always going to be Len, had the most potential. Whether he does deliver is, you know, I think Māori are justifiably still watching.
Scotty Morrison, I think there was some anxiety or some concern out there in the electorate when the whole credit card spending saga came up, you know, and that was another reason why they thought, well, can we really trust this guy, or can he actually control himself, if you like? You know, we had the whole ape chest beating and the face slapping and those type of antics, if you like. And there was a level of anxiety and concern at the time as to, well, we don't really trust John Banks, and this is, you know, the other option or the alternative.
I think Māori are being cautious, and we've got every reason to be cautious. History tells us to be cautious. History tells us not to trust, and so, as Matiria has alluded to, the proof's in the pudding. We're going to have to wait and see if he has the courage and the vision to, and of course the structures around him, to be able to push the Māori agenda to represent us in the Super City Council. I think that I think he has the potential, and I think his heart is in the right place. I mean, I ran into him yesterday at TVNZ. He came, John Banks wouldn't have done this, but he came straight over and shook my hand like a bro would, and straight, you know, gave me a hongi straight away and said, we need to catch up after and have a talk about a few things. And I said, yeah, fine, that's cool. But to me, that shows that he's open-minded and open-hearted. And I think that potentially he could be good for us, but he's going to have to be courageous in the battles that he's going to have to fight.
And we'll talk a bit later on about some of those battles that lie ahead of him.